What if I told you that a single moment of curiosity from millions of years ago changed the course of evolution forever? Deep in the prehistoric world, when massive creatures ruled the earth and survival meant everything, one young girl's innocent act of taking a baby chick would create ripples through time that we still feel today. This isn't just a story about ancient times. It's about how one small decision can alter the destiny of entire species. The girl had no idea that her simple act of kindness would become the foundation of a bond between humans and birds that would last for millions of years, eventually leading to the domestication of chickens and changing human civilization itself. But every great change starts with a single moment, and this moment began when curious eyes met helpless chirping in the shadow of towering dinosaurs. Kira pressed her small body against the rough bark of the ancient tree, her heart pounding like thunder in her chest. The ground beneath her bare feet trembled with each heavy footstep of the massive beast that had been hunting her family for 3 days. Through the thick leaves above, she could see patches of the orange-red sky that marked another dangerous evening in this prehistoric world where humans lived in constant fear. The 12-year-old girl had been separated from her tribe during the chaos of the morning hunt when a pack of saber-toothed cats had attacked their camp. She had run blindly through the dense forest, following the sound of the river, hoping to find her way back to the others. But as the sun began to set, she realized she was completely lost in this terrifying world of giant creatures and endless wilderness. Kira's stomach growled painfully. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, and her water gourd had been empty since noon. Her tribe had taught her which berries were safe to eat and how to find clean water, but fear had clouded her judgment. Every shadow looked like a predator. Every sound made her freeze with terror. As she carefully climbed higher into the tree, trying to get a better view of her surroundings, she heard something that didn't belong to the usual chorus of roars and growls that filled the prehistoric landscape. It was a soft, desperate chirping sound coming from somewhere below. The sound was so different from the threatening noises she had been hearing all day that it made her pause and listen more carefully. Following the sound with her eyes, she spotted a small nest that had fallen from one of the upper branches during a recent storm. The nest lay broken on the ground about 20 feet from her tree, and inside it, she could see a tiny movement. A baby bird was trapped inside the scattered twigs and grass, its calls growing weaker with each passing moment. Kira's first instinct was to ignore the creature and focus on her own survival. Her tribe had always taught her that in this dangerous world, helping others was a luxury they couldn't afford. Every moment spent on anything other than finding food, water, or shelter could mean the difference between life and death. But something about the helpless chirping touched a part of her heart that she hadn't felt since being separated from her family. The little bird reminded her of her baby brother, Tam, who was only 6 months old. She remembered how he would cry when he was hungry or scared, and how her mother would always comfort him with gentle touches and soft humming. The memory of her family made her chest tight with sadness and fear. She didn't even know if they were still alive. Looking around carefully to make sure no predators were nearby, Kira slowly climbed down from her hiding place. The forest floor was covered with fallen leaves and broken branches from the recent storms that had been battering the area. Every step she took seemed incredibly loud in her ears, and she constantly looked over her shoulder for any sign of danger. As she approached the broken nest, she could see that the baby bird was unlike any creature she had ever seen before. It was covered in soft, fluffy down that was a mixture of brown and gold colors. Its tiny beak was a bright orange, and its eyes were large and dark, filled with fear but also a strange trust as it looked up at her. The bird was clearly very young, probably only a few days old. Its wings were still tiny and useless, and it couldn't even stand properly on its weak little legs. Without its mother to bring food and protection, it would surely die before morning. The thought made Kira's stomach twist with sympathy. She had never seen a bird quite like this one. In her world, most birds were either massive, terrifying creatures with sharp talons and beaks that could tear through flesh, or small, quick birds that were impossible to catch, and ate only insects. This little creature seemed different somehow. It wasn't trying to bite her or escape when she reached toward it. Instead, it seemed to be asking for help. Carefully, she reached down and scooped the tiny bird into her cupped hands. It was incredibly light, weighing almost nothing, but she could feel its tiny heart beating rapidly against her palms. The bird's soft down was amazingly warm and comforting to touch. It stopped chirping immediately when she picked it up, as if it somehow understood that she was trying to help. Holding the small creature close to her chest, Kira felt a strange sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since losing her family. For the first time in 3 days, she wasn't just focused on her own survival. She had something else to care for, something that depended on her completely. But caring for the bird would make her own survival much more difficult. She would need to find food not just for herself, but for the hungry baby bird as well. She would need to find shelter that could protect both of them from the dangerous predators that hunted at night. And she would have to do all of this while carrying a fragile creature that could be easily injured or killed. As if responding to her thoughts, the baby bird made a soft peeping sound and nestled closer to the warmth of her body. The simple gesture melted away all of her doubts. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she couldn't abandon this helpless creature to die alone in the wilderness. The sound of breaking branches in the distance reminded her that she wasn't safe yet. She quickly looked around for a better hiding place where she could spend the night with her new companion. About 50 yards away, she spotted a small cave hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. It looked just big enough for her to crawl inside, and the entrance was narrow enough that most large predators wouldn't be able to follow her. Moving as quietly as possible, she made her way toward the cave while keeping the baby bird pressed safely against her chest. The forest around her was full of the sounds of hunting and being hunted. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the roar of a massive carnivore, followed by the terrified cries of whatever creature it was chasing. The cave turned out to be deeper than it had appeared from the outside. Once she crawled through the narrow entrance, she found herself in a small chamber that was completely hidden from the outside world. The walls were dry, and the floor was covered with a thick layer of soft sand that would make a comfortable place to sleep. As she settled down for the night, Kira carefully examined her tiny companion in the dim light that filtered through the cave entrance. The baby bird seemed healthy despite its ordeal, and it appeared to be getting stronger now that it was warm and safe. Its eyes were bright and alert, and it kept making soft chirping sounds that seemed more content than desperate. For the first time since losing her family, Kira smiled. She had no idea that this moment would be remembered millions of years later as the first time a human had shown kindness to what would eventually become one of the most important domesticated animals in human history. She didn't know that she was holding the ancestor of creatures that would one day provide eggs and meat to feed billions of people across the world. All she knew was that she had found something precious in this dangerous world, and she was determined to protect it no matter what challenges lay ahead. As she drifted off to sleep with a warm little bird nestled against her chest, Kira could never have imagined that her simple act of compassion would echo through time and eventually change the relationship between humans and animals forever. The night sounds of the prehistoric forest surrounded their hidden cave like a lullaby of danger. But inside their small sanctuary, a girl and a bird slept peacefully, bound together by the first threads of a connection that would grow stronger with each passing day. The first rays of dawn filtered through the cave entrance, waking Kira from the deepest sleep she had experienced since becoming lost. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was and expected to see the familiar faces of her tribe members around their morning fire. Instead, she found herself staring at the rough stone walls of the small cave, with the baby bird still nestled warm and safe against her chest. The little creature had grown noticeably during the night. Its down seemed fluffier, its colors more vibrant, and its movements more coordinated. When it opened its dark eyes and looked up at her, Kira felt that same strange connection she had experienced the evening before. It was as if they understood each other without needing words or sounds. But understanding wouldn't keep them alive. Kira's stomach was cramping with hunger, and she knew the baby bird must be even hungrier than she was. In her tribe, she had learned that young creatures needed to eat much more frequently than adults to support their rapid growth. If she didn't find food soon, her new companion might not survive another day. Carefully placing the bird in a soft nest she made from her torn clothing and some dry grass she found in the cave, Kira crawled to the entrance to survey their surroundings. The forest looked peaceful in the early morning light, but she knew that could change instantly. Most of the large predators hunted during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, making this both the safest and most dangerous time to search for food. She had noticed some berry bushes near the fallen nest where she had found the bird, and her tribe had taught her to recognize several types of edible roots and nuts. But she had no idea what the baby bird could eat. Adult birds in her world typically ate insects, small animals, or seeds, but this creature was too young for any of those foods. Watching it carefully, she noticed that it kept opening its tiny beak and making soft peeping sound whenever she moved. The gesture reminded her of how human babies acted when they were hungry, opening their mouths and expecting their mothers to feed them. Perhaps she could try giving it tiny pieces of the softer food she found. Leaving the bird safely hidden in the cave, Kira ventured out to gather breakfast. She moved like a shadow through the forest, using every skill her tribe had taught her about silent movement and staying hidden from predators. The berry bushes were exactly where she remembered them, heavy with small purple fruits that her people had always considered safe to eat. As she filled her hands with berries, she became aware of being watched. At first, she thought it might be a predator, and her heart began to race with fear. But when she looked around carefully, she spotted several adult birds perched in the trees above her. They were much larger than her baby companion, but she could see the family resemblance in their coloring and the shape of their beaks. These adult birds seemed curious about her rather than afraid. They made soft clucking sounds and tilted their heads as they watched her gather food. One of them, a female with particularly bright plumage, flew down to a lower branch and seemed to be studying her intently. Suddenly, Kira realized that these might be the baby bird's family. Perhaps the fallen nest had belonged to one of these adults, and they had been searching for their lost chick. The thought filled her with both hope and sadness. Hope because it meant the baby bird might be reunited with its real family, and sadness because she had grown attached to the little creature during their short time together. But As she watched the adult birds more carefully, she noticed something strange. They made no attempt to approach the area where the nest had fallen, and they showed no signs of distress that would indicate they were missing a baby. Instead, they seemed more interested in the berries she was gathering than in searching for a lost chick. One of the birds flew down to the ground near her and began pecking at some small seeds that had fallen from the berry bushes. It ate delicately, choosing only certain seeds and ignoring others. Kira watched carefully, trying to understand what made some seeds acceptable and others not. If she could learn what these birds consider good food, perhaps she could use that knowledge to feed her baby companion. Gathering some of the seeds the adult bird had chosen, along with her berries, Kira carefully made her way back to the cave. She found the baby bird exactly where she had left it, but it seemed much more alert and active than before. It chirped excitedly when it saw her return and opened its beak wide in an unmistakable request for food. Kira tried offering it a small piece of berry first. The bird accepted it eagerly, swallowing the soft fruit and immediately opening its beak for more. Encouraged by this success, she tried one of the smaller seeds. The bird examined it carefully with its tiny tongue before swallowing it as well. Over the next hour, they established a feeding routine that worked for both of them. Kira would eat some of the food to satisfy her own hunger, then spend time patiently feeding tiny pieces to her companion. The bird's appetite seemed endless, but each successful feeding made it noticeably stronger and more active. As the day progressed, Kira began to understand more about her unusual companion. Unlike the wild bird she had observed with her tribe, this creature seemed naturally trusting of humans. It didn't try to escape when she handled it, and it actually seemed to enjoy being close to her warmth and protection. The bird also displayed a remarkable intelligence that surprised her. When she moved around the cave, it would follow her with its eyes and turn its head to track her movements. When she made soft sounds, it would respond with its own chirps and peeps. It almost seemed like they were having conversations, even though neither of them could understand the other's language. By midday, the baby bird was strong enough to stand on its own legs for short periods. It would wobble unsteadily around the small space she had created for it, exploring with the curiosity typical of young creatures everywhere. But it always returned to her side when it was tired or when something startled it. During one of these explorations, something remarkable happened. Kira was sitting quietly near the cave entrance, keeping watch for predators while the bird wandered around behind her. Suddenly, she heard a different kind of sound from her companion. Not the usual chirping, but something that sounded almost like an attempt to copy the humming sound she had been making. Turning around in amazement, she saw the baby bird looking directly at her and making soft sounds that bore an unmistakable resemblance to her own humming. It was the first clear sign that the bird was not just accepting her care, but actually tried to communicate with her in her own language. The realization filled Kira with wonder and excitement. In all the stories her tribe told about interactions with animals, she had never heard of anything like this. Wild animals might become tame enough to tolerate human presence, but they didn't try to learn human sounds or behaviors. This little creature was doing something completely unprecedented. As the afternoon wore on, their communication became more sophisticated. Kira discovered that different sounds she made would trigger different responses from a bird. Soft, gentle sound would make it calm and content, while sharper sounds would make it alert and attentive. The bird began to develop its own vocabulary of sounds that seemed to have specific meanings. One sound for hunger, another for contentment, and yet another for when it wanted her attention. But Their peaceful day was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps outside the cave. Kira immediately grabbed the bird and pressed herself against the back wall of the cave, holding her breath and hoping that whatever was out there wouldn't discover their hiding place. Through the entrance, she could see the massive shadow of something moving past, something far too large to be anything but a major predator. The baby bird seemed to sense her fear and remained completely silent, as if it understood that making noise could endanger them both. They waited in terrified silence for what felt like hours before the sounds faded away, and Kira felt safe enough to breathe normally again. The incident reminded her that despite their growing bond, they were still in constant danger in this prehistoric world. She would need to be much more careful about their safety if she wanted both of them to survive long enough for their unique relationship to develop further. As evening approached, Kira realized that she felt happier and more hopeful than she had since losing her family. Taking care of the baby bird had given her a purpose beyond mere survival, and the creature's obvious affection for her filled an emotional need she hadn't even realized she had. She also began to understand that what was happening between them was special in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The bird's unusual intelligence, its willingness to trust her completely, and its apparent desire to communicate with her were unlike anything her people had ever experienced with wild animals. As they settled down for their second night together, with the baby bird once again nestled safely against her chest, Kira made a silent promise to protect and care for this remarkable creature no matter what challenges lay ahead. She had no way of knowing that this promise would eventually lead to one of the most important relationships in human history, but she could feel that something significant was beginning between them. Outside the cave, the prehistoric world continued its eternal dance of hunt and survival, but inside their small sanctuary, a girl and a bird were creating something entirely new, a partnership based on trust, communication, and mutual care that would echo through millions of years and eventually transform both their species forever. 3 weeks had passed since Kira first discovered the baby bird, and their lives had fallen into a rhythm of survival that neither could have imagined possible. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had evolved into something far more complex and meaningful, a true partnership that defied everything Kira had been taught about the relationship between humans and animals. The bird, which she had begun calling Chirp because of its constant vocalizations, had grown dramatically during their time together. It now stood nearly as tall as her hand. Its down had been replaced by beautiful feathers that shimmered with gold and brown patterns, and its intelligence continued to amaze her daily. But the most remarkable change wasn't physical. It was the depth of communication and trust that had developed between them. Chirp had learned to understand many of Kira's words and gestures, responding appropriately when she warned of danger, called for silence, or indicated it was time to move to a new location. Even more surprisingly, the bird had begun to develop its own complex vocabulary of sounds that Kira was gradually learning to interpret. Different combinations of chirps, clicks, and warbles indicated everything from hunger and contentment to warnings about approaching predators. This morning was different from the others they had shared. As Kira emerged from their current shelter, a hollow tree they had been using for the past week, she noticed that Chirp wasn't following his usual routine of staying close by her side. Instead, the bird was standing at the edge of their clearing, looking intently in the direction of the distant mountains, making soft sounds that she had never heard before. Following Chirp's gaze, Kira saw something that made her heart race with excitement and fear. Smoke was rising from behind a ridge about 2 miles away, the unmistakable sign of a human campfire. After weeks of believing she would never see her people again, she had found evidence that other humans were nearby. But Chirp's behavior suggested he sensed something she couldn't detect. The bird was making warning calls similar to those he used when predators were approaching, but mixed with other sounds that seemed to indicate confusion or distress. His feathers were slightly ruffled, and he kept looking back and forth between her and the distant smoke as if trying to decide what they should do. Kira's first instinct was to immediately head toward the smoke, hoping to find her tribe or at least other friendly humans who might help her get home. But Chirp's obvious concern made her pause and think more carefully. In their weeks together, the bird had never been wrong about sensing danger, and his warnings had saved them from predators on several occasions. She spent the morning observing the distant campfire while keeping herself and Chirp hidden in the dense underbrush at the edge of their clearing. Through careful watching, she was able to make out the shapes of several people moving around the fire. They appeared to be humans, but something about their movements and behavior seemed different from what she remembered of her own tribe. As the day progressed, she began to notice other troubling signs. The people around the fire seemed to be constantly arguing, their voices carrying across the distance in harsh, aggressive tones. She saw them pushing and shoving each other over food, and their camp appeared chaotic and disorganized compared to the careful, cooperative way her tribe had always lived. Chirp's agitation increased throughout the day, and by afternoon, he was making urgent warning calls whenever she showed any sign of wanting to approach the distant camp. His distress was so obvious that Kira began to seriously reconsider her plan to seek help from these strangers. Her decision was made for her when a small group of the strangers began moving in their direction, apparently searching for something or someone. As they got closer, Kira could see that they were indeed humans, but they looked different from her people. They were larger and more heavily built with darker, more angular features, and they carried weapons that were more sophisticated than anything her tribe had ever made. More disturbing was their behavior. They moved through the forest with aggressive confidence, showing none of the careful respect for the environment that her people had always practiced. They talked loudly, broke branches carelessly, and seemed to have no concern for the noise they were making or the animals they might be disturbing. When they passed within 100 yards of her hiding place, Kira overheard enough of their conversation to understand that they were indeed searching for something specific. They mentioned tracks, fresh signs of human presence, and their determination to find whatever they were hunting. The tone of their discussion made it clear that their intentions were not friendly. Chirp had been completely silent during their approach, pressing himself close to Kira's body and remaining perfectly still. But as soon as the strangers had passed, he began making urgent sounds that clearly meant they needed to leave this area immediately. His intelligence and ability to sense danger had once again proven invaluable. Over the next several days, Kira and Chirp were forced to constantly change locations as the group of strangers continued searching the forest. The experience taught them new levels of cooperation and communication as they worked together to stay hidden while finding food and shelter. During this stressful time, Kira began to notice that Chirp was developing abilities that went far beyond normal bird behavior. He had learned to scout ahead of their movements, flying short distances to check for dangers and returning to guide her along the safest routes. He could identify approaching threats long before her human senses detected them, and he had developed a sophisticated system of warning calls that told her exactly what type of danger was approaching and from which direction. Most remarkably, Chirp had begun to show strategic thinking that rivaled her own. When they needed to cross open areas where they might be spotted, the bird would suggest specific timing by watching the movement patterns of potential threats and indicating when it was safe to move. When they needed to find new shelter, he would explore multiple options and guide her toward the best choices. Their partnership had evolved from simple companionship into something that was making both of them more capable of surviving in this dangerous world. Together, they could accomplish things that neither could have managed alone. One evening, as they rested in a well-hidden grove near a small stream, Kira made a discovery that filled her with wonder and a strange sense of destiny. While watching Chirp interact with some wild birds that had approached their camp, she noticed that he was somehow different from the others, even those of what appear to be the same species. The wild birds showed typical wariness around her, keeping their distance and ready to flee at the first sign of threat. But they seemed drawn to Chirp, approaching him with curiosity and engaging in complex conversations of chirps and calls. What amazed Kira most was that Chirp appeared to be translating their communications, turning to her after each exchange and making the specific sounds he used to convey information about food sources, water locations, or potential dangers. It was as if Chirp was serving as a bridge between the human and bird worlds, able to communicate with both species and share information between them. The realization gave Kira a glimpse of possibilities she had never imagined, a world where humans and animals could work together as partners rather than simply existing as predators and prey. That night, as they settled down to sleep, Kira reflected on how much her life had changed since finding Chirp. She had begun their relationship simply trying to save a helpless baby bird, but the bird had ended up saving her in ways she was still discovering. He had given her companionship during the loneliest period of her life, taught her new ways of understanding and communicating with the natural world, and proven that the boundary between human and animal intelligence was far less distinct than her people had always believed. But more than that, Chirp had shown her that trust and cooperation could create something stronger than either individual could achieve alone. Their partnership was proof that different species could form bonds based on mutual respect and benefit, sharing their unique abilities to help each other survive and thrive. As she drifted off to sleep with Chirp nestled securely against her shoulder, Kira had no idea that she was experiencing the beginning of something that would eventually transform human civilization. She didn't know that millions of years in the future, humans would live in partnership with domesticated birds that would provide them with food, companionship, and even assistance with various tasks. All she knew was that she had found something precious and unique in this dangerous prehistoric world, and that the bond between her and Chirp was continuing to grow stronger and more complex with each passing day. What had started as a simple rescue had become a true friendship, and that friendship was opening doors to possibilities neither of them had ever dreamed possible. The next morning would bring new challenges and new discoveries, but tonight they slept peacefully, two unlikely partners who had found in each other the key to surviving in a world that seemed determined to destroy them both. 2 months had transformed Kira and Chirp from desperate survivors into something unprecedented in the prehistoric world, a human-animal team that functioned with the efficiency and coordination of a single organism. Their daily existence had become a seamless dance of cooperation, communication, and mutual dependence that neither could have imagined when their partnership first began. Chirp had grown into a magnificent bird, nearly the size of a small eagle, but with coloring and features that remained unique among all the species Kira had encountered. His intelligence had continued to develop at an extraordinary rate, and He now demonstrated problem-solving abilities that often surpassed her own. More importantly, he had learned to think strategically about their long-term survival rather than just reacting to immediate threats. This morning brought proof of just how sophisticated their partnership had become. Kira woke to find that Chirp had already completed his daily reconnaissance flight and was waiting to report his findings. Through their complex system of sounds and gestures, he communicated that he had located a large herd of plant-eating dinosaurs about a mile to the east, along with fresh water and abundant fruit trees. But he also warned her of something more concerning: signs that the group of hostile humans who had been hunting them was moving in their direction again. Chirp's ability to track multiple threats and opportunities simultaneously had become one of their greatest advantages in staying alive in this dangerous world. As they prepared to relocate to the area Chirp had scouted, Kira marveled at how naturally they worked together. She no longer needed to give him instructions or worry about his safety during their travels. He understood their goals and constraints as well as she did, and he often anticipated her needs before she was aware of them herself. Their movement through the forest demonstrated the remarkable efficiency they had achieved. Chirp would fly ahead to scout the route, returning periodically to guide her around obstacles or dangers. When they encountered terrain that was difficult for her to navigate, he would find alternative paths or warning her of hazards she might not notice. When she needed rest, he would locate secure resting spots with good visibility and escape routes. During one of their rest stops, something extraordinary happened that would change Kira's understanding of what was possible between humans and animals. As she sat quietly eating some berries Chirp had found, a family of the small, quick mammals or tribe called tree dancers approached their resting spot. Normally, these creatures were extremely wary of humans and would flee at the first sign of human presence. But these animals seemed drawn to Chirp, approaching him with curiosity and obvious trust. As Kira watched in amazement, Chirp began communicating with them in their own language of chittering sounds and tail movements. After several minutes of this interspecies conversation, Chirp turned to Kira and began making the specific sounds he used when he wanted her to remain very still and quiet. Then, to her astonishment, he guided the family of tree dancers directly to her, indicating through gestures that they should approach without fear. The small mammals, still obviously nervous but trusting Chirp's assurances, came close enough for Kira to observe them in detail. She could see that they were far more intelligent than her tribe had ever realized, with complex social behaviors and communication patterns that rivaled those of many larger animals. But the most remarkable aspect of this encounter was what happened next. One of the young tree dancers, apparently the boldest of the group, actually touched Kira's hand with its tiny paw before scampering back to its family. The gesture was clearly deliberate and meaningful, a recognition that she was not a threat, mediated by Chirp's presence and communication. As the tree dancers departed, Chirp made sounds that Kira had learned meant important and remember. She understood that he was trying to tell her that this interaction was significant beyond the immediate moment, though she wasn't sure exactly what he meant. The meaning became clearer over the following days as similar interactions began occurring with other animals they encountered. Word seemed to spread through the animal community that Chirp's human companion could be trusted, and creatures that would normally flee from human contact began approaching their camp with curiosity rather than fear. Kira began to understand that Chirp was somehow serving as an ambassador between the human and animal worlds, using his unique position to broker a kind of peace treaty that had never existed before. Animals trusted him because he was one of them, but they also trusted her because he vouched for her character and intentions. This development opened up possibilities that revolutionized their survival strategy. Animals began sharing information with them about food sources, water locations, weather patterns, and approaching dangers. In return, Kira's human abilities, her tool use, her strategic thinking, and her understanding of fire and shelter construction began benefiting the animals around them. She discovered that she could help injured animals using techniques her tribe had developed for treating human wounds. She could provide warnings about human hunters that animals might not detect until it was too late. Most importantly, she could offer protection to smaller, more vulnerable creatures by including them in the safe zones she and Chirp established around their campsites. Word of these unusual alliances spread beyond the immediate animal community. Kira began noticing that predators seemed more hesitant to approach areas where she and Chirp had established camps. It was as if the local animal network was actively working to protect them, warning of approaching threats, and sometimes even intervening to help them escape dangerous situations. One dramatic example occurred when they were trapped in a narrow canyon by a pack of saber-toothed cats. Just as the predators were closing in, a flock of large birds descended from the sky, creating enough confusion and distraction for Kira and Chirp to escape through a route the birds had indicated. The rescue was clearly coordinated and intentional, not just a fortunate coincidence. These experiences fundamentally changed Kira's understanding of intelligence and consciousness in the animal world. Her tribe had always viewed animals as simple creatures driven only by basic instincts for food, reproduction, and survival. But her partnership with Chirp had revealed that animals possessed complex thoughts, emotions, and social structures that were far more sophisticated than humans had ever recognized. She began to see that the traditional human view of dominance over nature was not only wrong, but counterproductive. The partnership approach she had stumbled into with Chirp was proving to be far more effective for survival than the adversarial relationship her people had always maintained with the animal world. As their reputation spread through the local ecosystem, Kira and Chirp found themselves at the center of an informal network of cooperation that extended across species boundaries. Animals would bring them information about approaching weather, seasonal changes, and the movements of both predators and prey. In return, they shared their human knowledge of tool making, problem solving, and strategic planning. This network even began providing early warning about the movements of the hostile human group that continued to search for them. Animals who had observed these strangers would report their locations and activities, allowing Kira and Chirp to stay well ahead of any pursuit. But perhaps the most significant development during this period was Chirp's growing interest in learning human skills and knowledge. He had mastered human communication to the point where they could discuss complex concepts and plans. Now he wanted to understand human technology and thinking patterns. Kira began teaching him about tool use, showing him how to select and modify objects to accomplish specific tasks. To her amazement, Chirp not only learned these techniques quickly, but began improving on them, combining human tool-making concepts with bird capabilities to create solutions neither species had developed independently. He learned to use his flight ability to place tools in locations Kira couldn't reach, to scout for materials she needed for construction projects, and to coordinate complex operations that required precise timing and positioning. Their collaboration was producing innovations that were beyond what either humans or birds had achieved alone. As winter approached, bringing new survival challenges, Kira realized that her accidental partnership with Chirp had evolved into something that might be the key to humanity's future relationship with the natural world. They had proven that cooperation between species could produce results that neither could achieve independently. She began to dream of a future where humans and animals work together as partners rather than adversaries, where intelligence and capabilities were shared across species boundaries, and where survival was achieved through cooperation rather than domination. It was a vision that challenged everything her culture had taught her about the proper relationship between humans and nature. As they prepared their winter shelter using techniques that combined human engineering with insights from various animal species, Kira felt a deep sense of gratitude for the day she had chosen to rescue a helpless baby bird. That simple act of compassion had led to discoveries that could transform not just her own life, but the entire future of human-animal relationships. She had no way of knowing that millions of years later, humans would indeed live in partnership with domesticated animals, that agriculture and civilization would depend on cooperation between species, and that the bond she had formed with Chirp was a preview of humanity's future. All she knew was that she had found something beautiful and powerful in the most unlikely circumstances, and that this discovery was continuing to unfold in ways that surprised and delighted her every single day. The harsh winter had tested every aspect of Kira and Chirp's partnership, but it had also revealed the true potential of their revolutionary approach to survival. As spring returned to their prehistoric world, they emerged from their carefully constructed shelter as something entirely new. The first human-animal team to successfully navigate a complete seasonal cycle through cooperation rather than domination. Their winter shelter had itself been a marvel of interspecies collaboration. Using human engineering principles combined with architectural insights from bees, birds, and burrowing animals, they had created a structure that was warmer, more secure, and more efficient than anything either species had built independently. The shelter had attracted the attention of other animals seeking winter refuge, and by season's end, they had become the center of a small community that included creatures from across the local ecosystem. Chirp had continued growing and evolving throughout the winter months, but the changes were no longer just physical. His intelligence had reached levels that challenged every assumption Kira had held about the differences between human and animal consciousness. He now engaged in abstract thinking, planned for future contingencies, and even showed what could only be described as creativity in solving complex problems. Most remarkably, Chirp had begun teaching other birds the communication techniques he had learned from Kira. A small flock of his own species had joined their community during the winter, and Chirp had systematically taught them basic human words and concepts. By spring, Kira found herself communicating with an entire group of birds who could understand and respond to human language. This development marked a turning point that neither Kira nor Chirp fully understood at the time. What they had accomplished during their months together was nothing less than the first step toward domestication, the process by which wild animals would eventually become human partners in building civilization. As the weather warmed and food became abundant again, their small interspecies community began attracting attention from a much wider area. Animals traveled from distant territories to observe this unprecedented cooperation between humans and wildlife. Some stayed to learn and participate, while others returned to their home ranges carrying news of what they had witnessed. The impact of this growing network became evident when Kira finally encountered other humans for the first time since her rescue of Chirp. A small band of travelers, displaced by territorial conflicts in their original homeland, stumbled upon Kira's settlement while searching for a safe place to establish their own camp. The travelers' initial reaction was a mixture of amazement, fear, and suspicion. They had never seen humans living in harmony with wild animals, and their first instinct was to assume that Kira had been somehow enchanted or corrupted by evil spirits. The idea that animals could be intelligent partners rather than resources to be exploited was completely foreign to their worldview. But Chirp and the other animals in their community quickly demonstrated capabilities that challenged these preconceptions. When the travelers expressed doubt about finding water in the area, Chirp led them directly to a spring they hadn't detected. When they struggled to locate suitable materials for shelter construction, the animals guided them to resources they would have overlooked. Most convincingly, when a dangerous predator approached their camp on the second night of the travelers' visit, the animal early warning system that Kira and Chirp had helped establish provided advance notice that allowed everyone to reach safety before the threat materialized. The travelers realized that far from being corrupted, Kira had discovered survival techniques that were superior to their traditional methods. Over the following weeks, some of the travelers chose to stay and learn these new approaches to human-animal cooperation. Others departed to spread word of what they had witnessed to other human groups. But all of them left changed by the experience, carrying with them a new understanding of what was possible between humans and the natural world. Among those who stayed was an elderly woman named Mira, whose deep knowledge of plant medicine and healing techniques complemented perfectly with the animal behavior insights that Kira and Chirp had developed. Mira had spent her life observing how animals treated illness and injury, and she was fascinated by the opportunity to learn directly from animal healers rather than just watching them from a distance. Working together, the three of them, along with Chirp and several other animal partners, developed medical techniques that combined human and animal knowledge in ways that were far more effective than either approach alone. They learned to identify medicinal plants by observing which ones animals sought out when they were sick. They developed new wound treatment methods by watching how different species cared for their injuries. Most importantly, they learned to diagnose illnesses by recognizing behavioral changes that animals instinctively understood but humans had never learned to interpret. These medical advances attracted even more attention from both human and animal communities. Word spread that at Kira's settlement, injuries and illnesses could be treated with unprecedented success. Sick or injured creatures began arriving from increasingly distant locations, seeking treatment from the interspecies medical team that had formed around the original partnership between Kira and Chirp. As their reputation grew, so did the complexity and sophistication of their cooperative community. Different species began specializing in tasks that suited their unique abilities while contributing to the overall welfare of the group. Bird provided early warning systems and aerial reconnaissance. Small mammals served as messengers and scouts for ground-level threats. Larger animals helped with construction projects and defense against major predators. But perhaps the most significant development during this period was the emergence of a new generation. Young animals who had grown up in this cooperative environment and considered interaction with humans to be completely natural. These animals showed none of the instinctive fear of humans that characterized their wild counterparts. Instead, they actively sought out human companionship and collaboration. Chirp had become the leader and teacher for many of these young animals, passing on not just the communication skills he had learned from Kira, but also a fundamental understanding that cooperation between species could benefit everyone involved. Under his guidance, a generation of animals was growing up with capabilities and perspectives that had never existed before in the natural world. The implications of this development became clear when some of these young animals chose to leave their birth families to become permanent partners with humans who visited the settlement. It was the beginning of the domestication process, animals voluntarily choosing to live with humans because they found the partnership beneficial and fulfilling. Kira watched these developments with a mixture of pride and amazement. What had begun as a simple act of compassion toward a helpless baby bird had evolved into something that was transforming the relationship between humans and animals across an entire region. The partnership principles she and Chirp had discovered were spreading like ripples across the prehistoric world, creating new possibilities wherever they took hold. As summer approached its peak, bringing with it the seasonal migrations that would test their community in new ways, Kira took time to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. She thought about the frightened, lost girl who had found a fallen bird's nest months ago, and how different her life had become since that moment of decision to help rather than ignore. The changes weren't just external. Kira herself had been transformed by her partnership with Chirp and their community. She had learned to see intelligence and consciousness in creatures her culture had dismissed as mindless. She had discovered that cooperation could achieve things that dominance never could. Most importantly, she had found a sense of purpose and belonging that went far beyond mere survival. Chirp, too, had become something unprecedented. He was no longer just a bird who happened to live with humans. He had become a bridge between worlds, a translator between species, and a leader in creating new forms of interspecies cooperation. His influence extended far beyond their immediate community, as animals throughout the region sought him out for guidance on how to interact beneficially with humans. As the sun set on what had been a particularly successful day of collaborative food gathering, Kira sat with Chirp on their favorite perch overlooking the valley where their community had flourished. Around them, humans and animals went about their evening routines with the easy familiarity of family members, each contributing their unique abilities to the welfare of the whole. Looking at this scene, Kira felt a deep sense of satisfaction mixed with wonder at how much had changed since that day she had first heard desperate chirping from a fallen nest. She had no way of knowing that she was witnessing the birth of principles that would eventually lead to agriculture, animal husbandry, and the domestication of species that would sustain human civilization for millions of years to come. All she knew was that she had found something beautiful in an act of simple kindness, and that this discovery had grown into something that was making the world a better place for both humans and animals. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she made a silent promise to continue nurturing and protecting this revolutionary partnership, knowing that its effects would ripple outward in ways she could never fully predict or understand. The bond between a lost girl and a rescued bird had become the foundation for a new way of living that honored the intelligence and value of all species. It was a legacy of trust that would echo through time, eventually transforming not just individual lives, but the entire relationship between humanity and the natural world that sustained them all.